Welcome to Discussions of Music, Healing, and Consciousness with your hosts Chris Noble and Bill Protzman. In today's episode, we celebrate Halloween and Dia de los Muertos with a deeper awareness of fear, what it is, how it works on us, and how we can use that for positive purposes. There's so much misunderstanding and judgment around fear. We felt you might appreciate our perspective as performers, so we show you how to play with it before you meet it in real life. Oh, and don't miss the short guided musical meditation at the close of the episode. We'll be talking about all that and much, much more, as always, in these open conversations, here on Discussions of Music, Healing, and Consciousness. There's some interesting things that have come up in the course of our last two podcasts, ending them with a meditation. And then we talked about something a few times, but we have never talked about it specifically. And hey, happy Halloween.
Oh, yes, of course. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. I thought maybe we ought to talk about fear, like specifically, and how to keep from spinning beyond the fear. Like fear in music is a good thing. You're scared and then it goes away, right? But oftentimes we get afraid of the fear, which is like the second level of crazy. And then we start to worry about being afraid of the fear, which is a third level of crazy. And it just like it mushrooms. It's like exponentially mushrooming. So like helping to put our feet on the ground with fear is probably, I think, a decent topic, right?
Fantastic topic. Yeah. Let's do it on the day where the veil is the thinnest from the material world and the non-material world.
Exactly.
That's another cool thing about Halloween is it's like it's the day in which you are the closest to the spirit realm.
Yeah.
I think the frequency is just that much more light. So there's sometimes and things that will drift in and out of that dimension.
Yes. There's no mistaking the Day of the Dead, right?
Right.
Dia de los Muertos, which happens tomorrow.
Tomorrow, I think. Yeah.
I think so. It's all messed up because people celebrate these things now on the weekends instead of on the actual day.
Right.
But that it is like where things are more permeable. Right.
I do like that, but it's true. It's like it's a really interesting that holiday, the Day of the Dead. I mean, what I like about one of the many things I like about that with a lot of cultures is that they don't fear death. And I think when it's anything that is clouded in fear, it's usually because it's reinforced. It's like what is fear at the end of the day? It's the unknown, probably.
Yeah.
That's what fear
I
is.
mean, there's reasonable. I hate to use words that describe it. There's a reason we should be anxious about the unknown.
Of course.
Right. I mean, that's normal.
It's healthy. It keeps you alive. Like I think that's the thing with fear is that it's also something that isn't necessarily like any emotion that's quote unquote negative, anger, guilt or whatever it is.
Yeah.
They're there for a reason. It's not to just dismiss them completely. You just don't want them running your life. And with fear, it's really that there's a really good, healthy aspect of fear. Fear keeps you alive if you're out hiking and doing physical sports, and it's that extra little bit of like, maybe I just won't go over to that ledge there, and versus if
take a selfie on the edge of this cliff.
Right. I'm just going to dangle right off because I have no fear.
Yeah.
You quickly would realize that is that's a recipe for actually like people just dying so young. Probably, you actually kind of look at it, you're like, oh, wow, fear is that's a really important emotion. So when you give it the respect of like, okay, I got you. Like, I see why you're there. And then you move okay, but let's also, balance it with, for example, like you're mentioning performing, right? As a musician, that fear before every show. I always have that fear before every single solitary performance ever. I think there's some element of it, and that's good, because that keeps you more on your toes and it makes sure that you really bring your A game and that you do all of these things that ultimately lead to a good performance. So fear in a way is good. It's that healthy little dose of it. So it's good to acknowledge like the positives of the emotion as well as the ways that we want to move through the really troubling and challenging parts.
at a really deep level, this is excellent work to do, but it won't work if you say that you're fearless. Like, I have no fear. Well, chemically, you do. I mean, things are going to trigger your brain chemistry to have a fear uh, chemical wash. I'm going to try to keep it really simple here, right? So, fear chemical wash is good. Keeps you away from the scary stuff, right? Things you shouldn't be doing, like running directly into the fire, you know. So, that's a good thing. But when you get to the place, like you were talking about, maybe obsessing over fear,
Mhm.
it's beyond fear. Fear is no longer in your system. At that point, it's come and gone. It's fast, you know. It's one of those triggers that we get bam, and then everything comes back to stasis. So hanging on to that, not so great to be called fearless, but on the other side of the spectrum, so at the other end of that, there are people who refuse to feel fear. Also a problem, right? Because your body is going to feel it. And if you are denying yourself that obvious physical response that you've had to something that scares you, that's a problem too, right? Because there's a lot of information that you need that you're going to be unable to have access to. You will have trained yourself to not pay attention to that stuff, and that's really bad. I mean, and the middle place. So the middle place is when
Mhm.
you learn how to be afraid and do it anyway.
Exactly. I think that's the key, Bill, is like it's being like, okay, I see you. Like I know you're there. And instead of shying away, I remember I was just recently rereading one of my favorite fantasy trilogies, His Dark Materials. It's with the book The Golden Compass and Subtle Knife and all that. And there's a character in it, Eirik Byronson. He's this the king of the bears, and he appears to be fearless. And he talks to the main character at a point, Lyra, and he tells her that he's like, I'm not fearless. I have fear. I just learned to master my fear. He's
Yeah.
like, I incorporate it. I use it as a part of his strength. It becomes a strength. Like it's there, and you just kind of go, okay, I acknowledge it, and then you proceed to do what it is that you still want to do, because that's the big thing, is that you don't want it to hold you back from doing things that you ultimately know you want to do, but they kind of freak you out. Like a lot of people, again, I know it's quite common for anyone who's not a musician, that the idea of even just singing at anything in public, like
Oh my
karaoke or
gosh.
anything
Yeah. You
like that,
tell me about it. They sing along.
terrifying.
It's
Yeah,
hard to
right.
get people to come out for that stuff.
Oh, there's so much
Yeah.
fear. There's so much fear there. And that's a good example of, I would say, maybe too much of the fear holding you back, because the second, people like you and me who are pretty decent at coaxing people, like you're like, okay, like just slowly like massage the crowd. And then eventually, they get, oh, okay. And then by the end, like they're all singing, and you can
Yeah.
see the joy, in their face at the end of it all. And your thought, my thought sometimes is, well, isn't that a great example of, if you mastered the fear, and if you were able to sing from the beginning, you would have had a whole hour of that experience, or you know what I mean? Just to You don't want it to hold you back from living life to the fullest
Yeah.
extent you can live it.
I like that fear is a component of that. And I'd feel like I was missing something if I wasn't a little bit, if the butterflies weren't circling before I walked on stage, I'd feel like I'd done something. It would be too rote to be authentic, maybe, you know?
Oh
And
yeah.
so how is it? So here's the real question on all this. So how do we use music to become more of a friend to our fear so that when we encounter it in real life, we have we're familiar with it. We know how it feels, right? We know how to use it. We know it's not permanent and all of that. So how do we do that skillfully with music, which I think is a great opening because, I mean, there's a lot of scary music out there.
Oh, well, you know what? There's scary music, absolutely. I mean, I heard someone blaring Thriller, Michael Jackson's Thriller in the
Yeah, yeah,
car. Of course, I mean that's an absolute classic Halloween song. I played that with a Halloween band or Halloween cover band last year. It was a real blast. Great bass line in it. But that's like a great version of quote unquote scary, because they have, well, it's not really scary, but it's got the whole Halloween theme going, zombies and all
yeah,
that stuff. That's always so much fun. And then on the flip side, I would say, you gave me the thought, Bill, of like, becoming friends with fear. And today I just moved out of my apartment today, and I'm going back to my hometown back in Ontario for about a month, and then maybe Mexico, and I'm not sure what's really happening. And I could feel that part of the fear of that unknown, right? Today being like, dude, what are you doing? Like, where are you really going right now? And I'm like,
But
ah,
you're
you
like,
know.
that's totally normal. I mean, you're not an adrenaline junkie in that sense, you
No,
know?
no. I mean, that's like again a good example of normal fear. But if I had let it take hold of me, I just wouldn't have left the apartment. I would have kept my apartment. I would have stayed
Yeah.
here. That would have been the easy way to, not to play it safe. And I knew that that wasn't the right move, but it still scared me to do it. So I knew that fear, when I could feel that, I was like, okay, this is actually a really good sign because it means I'm pushing myself out of my comfort zone. And I've done this enough now in my life where I know every time I feel that and then I push through it and get to the other side, it's always very rewarding, whatever that situation is. So it's a good way to start to become friends with fear, and you use it as a like a barometer or a kind of like
Yeah.
an alarm or like an indicator of, okay, this seems like this kind, because then there's another fear of like, dude, that's a terrible idea, don't do that, you're gonna endanger.
Yes, exactly. Right.
And you want to know what that fear feels like too, and that's different,
Yeah.
right? So you
And
start
then
to kind of
there's,
understand it more.
sheer terror, deer in the headlights. I
Yeah,
mean,
you know.
and this is going to air after Halloween, but if anybody spends some time in a haunted house or likes to watch scary movies, that thrill is so cool. I remember the first time watching Wait Until Dark, and it's a classic. I hadn't seen it before, right? And it was a classic when I saw it, and which gives you an idea of how old I am. But there were people like jumping over the seats behind them at the
Wow.
big moment in that movie. Literally, people just jumping. There's no way that you can be immune, to that, even though you see it over and over. I maybe seen it 6 times in my life, and it still gets me, right?
Oh yeah.
There's something about that classic, but I know it's a movie. I knew it was a movie going in,
Still,
but still,
a good horror film is.
right? And I mean, we've got to be familiar with that too. You've got to know what it feels like to be that terrified or that shocked, maybe, because
Yeah.
it's a buildup, and the release is almost welcome. When the tension finally comes off and you
Oh
can
yeah. You can
scream or
breathe
jump over
again.
the, you
Yeah.
know. So it's good to play around with that. But scary films aren't the only way. I mean, there's we don't often think of music as being that shocking,
Well,
you know.
if you go to an intense, like a heavy metal like concert or something where it's very dissonant music, it's very, very, very aggressive, and they love to do the whole demonic, satanic,
Oh yeah,
symbolism and
lights,
costume and
theater.
lights, and all that stuff. I mean, it doesn't get much more kind of, yeah, dark and eerie and freaky than that kind of stuff. And those are really fun shows. I've been
Oh
to
yeah, they're
some, and
they're
they're
incredible.
just amazing.
Is there any music that you can listen to with only the audible stimulus in your ears and get freaked out with?
I think we talked about this last episode, and I
Yeah,
sent
yeah.
you some of that. Other than some soundtracks, like actually the soundtrack to the movie Signs by M. Night Shyamalan.
Oh my gosh,
Um,
yes. Who
uh,
does that? Composer was amazing. He worked with. They've
James
worked
Newton
together.
Howard. James
Yes,
Newton
yes.
Howard. Amazing. He's done some great ones. And I think anyway, yeah, fantastic score. Just the strings, the way they kind of like are in dissonant, like yeah, yeah, and then they can blend
Yeah,
together in a really creepy way. And it's also a great film. But yeah, that one would do it for me.
yeah. I agree. And probably soundtracks from all of the other, I'm going to say more modern horror movies that are on the artsy side versus the Scream 28 kind of movies,
Mhm.
or
Yeah,
whatever number we're on now,
I probably up
at
there. Same
least.
as Saw.
Yeah, and Saw, yeah, whatever. But I mean, there's scary stuff in there too. But when you're talking about the really artful tension and release of a horror film, Shyamalan really knows how to get it. You
Yeah,
know?
his early ones. I mean, his career is kind of hilarious for me. It started so good, and then just anyway. But his
Yeah,
first, I'd say his first 4 or 5 were really great, and that the Signs was in that. I think it was like his fourth or something at that point, and that just like he did it like a Hitchcock meets, a bit of Spielberg, and then meets something more darker and more sinister than both of those, and oh, fantastic! It was
we
creepy.
watched for Halloween. Yeah, last night we watched a bunch of scary movies, and we saw Us,
I
which
haven't
is
seen that.
by the same filmmaker that made. I don't know, gosh, I'm blanking on this now, but his first film was a total hit, and it was terrifying. And Us is also terrifying. I'm not going to reveal any plotline stuff here, But the thing that I noticed about Us was that the music wasn't as scary as I wanted.
Hmm. Interesting.
And it is weird because once you start to like experience fear and you feel how that feels for yourself and you get some familiarity with it, you also know where your limits are, or you
Hmm.
have a better sense of where your limits are. I mean, stuff is still going to scare me, right? But I was interested in the contrast between these two films. Same filmmaker, different plot, different story, but I was paying attention, to what are they going to use here for the music. And I'm not saying the music wasn't scary. So if you're listening to this, don't get me wrong. Both films are terrifying,
Hmm.
but I didn't feel as much of a pop, I guess, or as much of that drawn out build up as
And
I
then the
wanted.
tension release.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
tension release. Yeah. I wanted more. And maybe it's just because I'm more evolved in terms of my experience of fear now. I don't know. I mean, how do you judge that? If you're making creepy music, like if you're recording something or putting something together, how do you know when it's creepy enough and hasn't crossed the line, right?
It's all feeling,
It's
right?
got to be.
There's not really no other way to do it. That's what's again so awesome about music is you feel it out. There's in a lot of senses there's not a lot of logical stuff. There is, it comes into play of course with music, but there's mostly it's all feeling, intuition, especially with the score. You're trying to literally write emotion,
Yeah,
in that
yeah.
particular emotion is fear in that scene, and you're like, okay, go, like how do I just create, you're creating fear from melody,
From
harmony,
nothing.
dissonance, whatever, from nothing.
Yeah.
And that's what you're literally, you're communicating an emotion through music. That's really what music is. It's a language, especially in film, to just be like, this is how you're supposed to feel right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Feel
Yeah.
fear right now, or feel love, or feel, excitement, or whatever, right?
Have you ever had any like total disconnects on that where you're watching some movie and the soundtrack totally left you flat or was different from the action?
Oh, yeah, many times. Yeah. Many not so great films. That's usually one of the sometimes the first thing that jumps out. Bad writing, bad music, bad acting. But yeah, it's immediately obvious, right? When it's just not hitting the tone. On the flip side of that, sometimes the juxtaposition of some what would be a scary scene, and then with really like groovy, fun, jazzy music or something,
Right.
could, it wouldn't evoke fear, but it would really be an interesting, it could make the scene really fun or something. I don't know, right?
Well, you can set it up that way too. I mean, you could have a scene that's supposedly terrifying or that nobody knows is going to be terrifying,
Hmm.
set up with happy, bouncy music until the moment where, everything changes,
And that's interesting. You can even, I've used this once and I've heard it in films before, is that it's a happy, like a sort of a jazz, big band swing song. And then all of a sudden they put effects on it and it just starts to warp it little bit by little
Yeah,
bit. And then
yeah.
there's like reverb and it starts to go like, nah, like all distant and creepy. And then all of a sudden they turn the song into a creepy song just with effects. So
Yeah.
that's, again, it's all about feeling. You're like, I don't know what's going to necessarily work, but you got to just, you'll know it when you feel it.
Right, right. Well, and you'll know it when you feel it if you're ready.
Yeah.
I remember going to, oh, what was it? It was like Sleeping Beauty or something. I was an infant. I remember watching it in a drive-in in the car seat, right? And it was so terrifying. I mean, I was scared. Like, you don't know whether that stuff's real or not.
Disney's scary as a kid.
Yeah. And plus, I'm a kid, and it's coming through a little speaker. The speaker used to hang over your window in the drive-in in the
Oh,
movie
that's
theater.
awesome.
So the sound was terrible, but none of that mattered, man. It was just terrifying. That dragon, man, I could feel the heat. It was that good. And I had some of those experiences since, but I don't have the same kind of terror in them. I think you get one shot,
You
you
know
know?
what? I have something that might one up that might do that for you, because I just thought about it too. I was like,
Oh,
okay,
great.
okay, so here you go. Here you go. So as a kid, right, you see the films, why is it so utterly scary, like as a kid on a level that just isn't the same when you're an adult? I think it's because you don't know that it's, you don't really know that it's not real, especially as a kid. Like, you know
Yeah.
what a movie is, but it's still very new to you, and
Yeah.
you can get very immersed in that and not
Oh,
really know that you're
very
not
quick.
in a film, right?
Yeah.
So if you ever do some virtual reality play, there's a couple of there's specifically horror video games, and I forget the name of some of these other ones that are really really creepy, but the Resident Evil series, you play any of the Resident Evil video games, they are, oh my God. Okay, this was many, quite 5, 6 years ago. I met my cousin. My cousin works in the video game industry, so he's got all the toys. And he had his virtual reality, and we were playing Resident Evil, and I had to take shots of whiskey just to get the courage to go around the corner. I was
Whoa.
sweating. I was like, I was so scared, and I like the alcohol was the only reason I even had the balls to keep going. It
Yeah,
was, and it was just there's one scene where you could hear a baby crying in this creepy way in
oh,
the bathroom, and you have to walk, but you're in virtual reality. You have headphones on, right? You don't
yeah,
hear, and so the headphones are a big game changer because you're fully immersed with your eyes
yeah.
and your
And
ears.
you're
You're
absolutely.
nowhere else. You are in that house, and it is terrifying. That game was so scary. I could barely get through 20 minutes was it. I couldn't do more.
I can relate to that. I really can. There's, there's a limit to how far you can push on your emotions.
Mm,
And like a muscle, you have to develop them, which is awesome because now there's a VR that lets you do the emotional work, as well as the mental work of figuring stuff out and the point and shoot kind of stuff. Now it gets into you,
right?
right? Much deeper
Oh yeah.
than
Oh
it
yeah.
than it ever could. Which, go headphones, by the way, plug for over the ears because first of all, they sound so much better. But there's a need to sort of protect our hearing too.
Yeah.
And um, earbuds, I notice on the new iOS release 15, I think there's maybe it was before that, they have a sound limiter built in there. And if you go over maximum volume a lot, it starts to bug you and you can turn it off. But it lets you know, which is a good
That's good.
idea,
Yeah, I like
because
that.
with the buds like close into your eardrums, there's no sort of space around them. So
Yeah.
you're a little bit more
Yeah.
susceptible, especially when peaks hit. If you're not using normalize and you listen to a lot of music, use normalize with earbuds, but go ahead and take it off when you've got the spatial headphones around you
Okay.
that are really designed they can give you, the power, but they'll help keep your ears healthy, which as musicians, it's too late for us, man. We're done.
Yeah, but for the rest of the
But for the rest
folk
of
out
it,
there, that's a little tip for you because that's
plus you
that's
can
that's
get,
true, man.
3D space. And I'm sure they're playing with you in virtual reality with that. You can hear things closer, further, left, right, behind, hear things that way.
Yeah.
And that can be terrifying.
Oh man,
Just,
it is next level.
I mean, imagine going to a movie theater, being able to put on a nice set of headphones and have the soundtrack be as 4D as the visual, you know?
And like I was just thinking about that. I'm like, but then there's also the nice. I'm like, that would be very immersive. You're right. But then what I like about the theater is that you're in a larger space that's still soundproof, but you have the speakers and you have space. You can feel that
Yeah.
space, yet it's
Yeah.
more than loud enough.
Oh, totally.
And yeah,
Have you noticed, maybe it's just me, there's a trend in movie making to push the extremes. So the new season of American Horror Story is out. No spoiler alerts here, but it is filmed in such contrast. So the dark scenes are very dark, almost to where you can't make out what's moving.
mm,
And then there's like lighter scenes that contrast with that. But even they aren't filmed at full brightness, like you and me talking now. They're still muted a bit.
hmm
And the other thing that's going on in movies, particularly, is that they are taking advantage of that amazing DBS that they've got, the surround sound and all of that,
hmm
and overdriving the soundtrack. Man, it is so loud
yeah,
that I'm like thinking of bringing a hearing protection when I go in. And then the dialogue is so
I
soft.
know.
And this
Yeah,
contrast is probably doing something, for us, or the movie makers think it is. But I want to know if that's healthful because we shouldn't have to be straining to enjoy something, in my opinion.
no,
Even
no.
fear, you can hit me with fear without pushing a limit. Look what Hitchcock did with Wait Until
Oh
Dark.
yeah,
It didn't take anything. There wasn't any crazy loud music. There wasn't any impossible to decipher dialogue. In fact, there was no dialogue. You know?
that makes me think of Paranormal Activity, where I'm
Yes.
pretty sure there was no music, and it's just sounds and it's just security camera footage. That's literally all it really is. But oh my God, the white noise, just the room tone ambience, that that you would
Yeah.
normally hear in audio, they really play with that, and you are just on the edge of your seat. I was always so impressed with those films. They were the one of the lowest budget horror films of all time. I think it was like about 40 or $50,000 for them to make
Wow.
the whole thing, and it grossed well over 30 million or more. And you're just like, wow, what a return on your investment. But also how genius. There's no major cast because it's just people living in a house, but shot in that security camera. So that's an easy, cheap camera. You don't need anything very expensive
Yeah,
for
yeah.
that. And all they do is brilliantly draw out scenes where there's people being possessed, and then having just things move around and all that fun stuff. But it's brilliant, and again plays on your senses because of that uh, silence. Almost the lack of music is what's
Right,
eerie about it, right?
right.
There's just almost nothing other than the and then those boom boom boom, the bang sounds or whatever happen in the action sequences. And so it's brilliant. So once again, music, sometimes almost the lack of it can be used to the advantage for fear as well.
So I think we're saying here is like get really close to your authentic fear, not the fear that comes from being afraid of being afraid. And that's a real thing, and not the crazy worry or anxiety that comes from the third level out of that, being afraid of being afraid and obsessing over that. No, don't go there. Just play with the core stuff, because that core emotion, like becoming familiar with that core emotion, is, according to at least all the psychology I've had, a really good thing. Versus stuffing it or saying it doesn't exist or denying it completely and just going over the cliff without a parachute, like in real life versus metaphorically.
Well, that's the thing, right? It's yeah. I like what you said there at the beginning, Bill. Was make friends with your fear, and
Yeah.
that's really what it comes down to. It makes me think back again to his Dark Materials and the third one, the Amber Spyglass, and they've cut a hole into the world of the dead, so they've transcended different dimensions, and they found the world of the dead, and they go down there, and their characters end up meeting, well, one of the characters ends up meeting her death,
Yeah.
and she meets her death, and he's this, I guess so she's feminine, so it's the masculine version, and he's a shadow, and she's like, oh, how did you get here? He's like, I've always been with you. I just, you're scared of me because you're scared of death, so I didn't want to intrude and freak you out, so I've just been kind of minding my own business, but I've always been here. I'm like, I'll be with you forever, and I'll happily take you on to the next part of your journey once your time comes. And there's nothing to fear. They had a beautiful friend, almost like a friendship formed, and she knew that that's just, again, part of life, and there's nothing to fear. And then once you make friends with it, you're able to once again master that fear, and then use it as a guide to know, oh, is this something that's pushing me out of my comfort zone? Okay, that's probably a good thing, let's do it.
That whole the idea of the shadow and owning your psychological shadows is like Jungian or something. It goes way
Yeah,
back, but it's getting a
definitely.
lot of play right now because when we get squeezed as people, uh, we can either resist that or collapse under it, or we can accept it. And often the acceptance results in a shadow journey or a heroic journey or what they call ego death. All of
Mm,
those terms are kind of synonymous, but it's a well-worn road. And you simply can't go there until you have some friendship with your fear. It's too scary otherwise.
yep.
I mean, knowing that you're going to literally or even metaphorically, in some cases, face your own death. It was literal for me, but it's metaphorical at other times.
Hmm.
You cannot release yourself from the grasp of your ego without encountering fear. That's a part of the process. So holding yourself back from it means that you're never going to get to integrate.
Hmm.
And I mean, anybody who's had a bad psychedelic trip probably knows a lot more about this than me. When you're in that place of just like utter terror,
Hmm.
uh, that's the place. Like that's where work happens.
So true.
And if you have some friendship with that, like you know, meeting your death, it's it's almost the perfect way of saying it. And you find out that it's your friend. That's that's really powerful. That's yin yang. It's the whole. It's everything that they tell us about in the great myths and heroic journeys throughout time and even up to the present day, including the Golden Compass and Harry Potter and all of the rest. Star
Yeah.
Wars, Lord of the
Hmm.
Rings. So there's a theme here, people.
Life is a
Oh,
hero's journey,
life is a hero's
one after
journey.
another, after another.
Or, we have to come up with a term for a non-gender specific term for the hero's journey.
Yeah, I'll get back to you on that one.
Yeah. You know
My
what? I'm
brain's
not going to
too
worry about it.
dead.
The trans community will tell us what we need to know,
There we go.
and it's going to be
Perfect.
a good one. I'm absolutely convinced. But
Absolutely.
that journey, has to come with fear.
Yeah, the more I become friends with my fear, the more it really becomes something where, today I was feeling a fear I hadn't felt in quite a while, and it made me happy. It actually got me excited. I was
Nice.
like, oh yeah, okay, you know what? I was getting a little complacent before. It was a little comfortable. And now that I'm, moving out and I have to, I'm going to be finding new places to stay and all this kind of stuff, that feels right. But it freaking me out. And then I was like, great, this is good. And then excitement replaced the fear in a way. What do they say? When you're nervous, it's 90% excitement, 10% fear. You
Yeah.
just, or depending, of course, on the severity of the nervousness, but it's just, there's always a mixture of fear in there. And that's good. That's healthy.
And the cool thing that you're saying, just as you're telling me this, makes me think, oh my gosh, I know what that feels like. I've had to move out of places, sometimes under duress. I can relate to
Yeah.
this. And so one of the effects of fear used wisely is community,
Mm.
because all of a sudden you realize that you have something in common and you're no longer alone.
Yeah, you're not this crazy person going insane on their own. You're like, oh wait,
Wait,
that's other people feel that too.
yeah, there are other crazy people going
Oh,
insane.
okay. We're all going crazy.
Join
Okay,
us.
great. We're all losing our goddamn minds.
It's exactly. Well, I mean, we've all been through the pandemic, right? So there's a
Yeah,
certain amount of, you can recognize fear in these large events, but when you recognize it on a more personal level, right? You're all of a sudden you realize that your partner is afraid of something and you didn't realize that they were afraid, and now you do. And it's like that changes everything,
mm,
because all of a sudden you can show up in a way that you weren't able to show up before.
yeah,
When you were either holding the fear away or unaware of it or couldn't feel it, and then that builds empathy and compassion and forgiveness. Just, it's this wonderful spiral that leads to such good things versus the spiral of fear that kind of leads to, you know, isolation and everything we don't want.
yeah. No, it's a really good point. I actually hadn't thought of that. Brings it. It does. It also, I find, when you're vulnerable and open with that fear, especially meeting strangers or something, it can bond you very quickly, like that
Yes.
vulnerability.
Yes.
You're like, oh my God, yeah, me too, right? Like, whoa, you're just freaking out. Okay, good, I'm freaking out too. And
Yeah.
then you're immediately friends. It's like you can just feel that immediate bond. There's
First
no
day of boot camp,
pretending.
or
Oh yeah,
all these events, the first day of school, like college,
yeah.
I've gone
First day
away
of
to college for the
school.
first time,
Yeah,
new job, which is kind of not the greatest environment because you're usually the only new one who's new there.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But, people can relate to that. And being honest about that is, for me anyway, it just works much better.
Oh yeah.
Like, my name is Bill. I'm an alcoholic and I am scared.
Yeah, yeah,
Right? What
totally.
does that do? Um, and Stephen King, yes, thank you. We're listening to you right now. Thank you for all the
Oh my
frightening
God, how
moments you've given
many?
us.
That guy's
Right?
written a lot.
Yeah. And a lot of beautiful stuff too, because what's the one about the teenage boys or pre-adolescent boys that,
Stand by Me,
yeah, by me. Yeah. So that's about
great film.
how to manage fear in a group and how that bonds, how that brings people together and solves conflict and does a bunch of other things too, but it's all fear-based. So
Mm.
you want to read The Master of Fear? Stephen
Oh yeah,
King's your
Stephen
man,
King for
right?
sure. Did you write The Shining too? Is that The
Oh yeah,
Shining?
he did wrote
Yeah.
The Shining. We just finished listening to that, and we're listening to Doctor Sleep now, which is sort of the follow-up from The Shining,
Oh,
where
okay.
they follow the character that survived through the next part of his life.
Wow.
Fascinating books, fascinating books. Heavy duty. I mean, they take time. What's the recording? 36 hours worth of book. It's a long book.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, he just cranks them out, doesn't he?
He does. But thank God, because somebody's got to offer us a sort of vicarious experience here,
Mm.
so we can dip our toes in the pool without being threatened by it, like physically threatened.
Hmm.
So music, just one way, but lots of ways to become a friend to your fear, uh, and to have quite an enjoyable time. Yeah, it's going to make you scared, but it's not going to threaten your life or any of it. It's going
No.
in that it's, I hate to say just a movie or just a book or just a song, but that helps because it won't kill you.
Well, yeah, I know, but it's so funny how the fear can just be so real. I remember when I first ever sang karaoke when I was, I think, 10 or something, 9 or 10 years old, and it was at this festival, this fair at my school, and I was just so scared to sing in front of people, although I'd always enjoyed it. And I'd sung in some choirs previously, so there was that, but I could hide behind people. Here was the first time I'd be singing a song on my own in a microphone. Oh my God, terrifying. I was so
Terrifying.
scared. But then I did, and I sung Born to Be Wild.
Oh,
and
nice.
and it was so much fun. The fear lasted about 5 to 10 seconds, and then the joy of what I was doing just flooded in. I was like, "Oh my God, I love karaoke!" And then I just made a ham of myself, and it was great. It was just so much fun. And so, that was a great example of that fear being, and it was intense, especially as a nine. You think the whole world's watching you and everyone's gonna judge you, and it's like, dude, no one cares. But of course, you don't know that. And yeah, the joy that replaced that fear was a really interesting flip of the switch. It's kind of like with skydiving, another really good example. The fear I felt when the doors opened to the airplane, the wind's rushing in, the noise is deafening, and you look and you're like, oh yeah, I am 10, 15,000 feet above the ground, no big deal. Oh, and I'm gonna jump out of this thing. Okay, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
All of my primal fears are going like 110%. And yet, thank God I was doing it tandem. So I'm attached to another guy, and he's like, okay, ready? And I'm like, no. and and he's like, all right, here we go. He's like, okay, one, we'll go on three, 1, 2, and then he jumps on two. And I'm like, that's and I screamed almost like I could barely almost scream, like the scream. I was so scared, and it was like 1 second, 2 second, and then by like even the third second, the fear was gone, and the sensation of falling was magic. I felt like I was flying,
Yeah.
and it was one of the most amazing sensations I've ever felt in my life. And so that complete juxtaposition, that from one extreme to another, fear, deep fear, like extreme fear, and primal fear. That's fear for your life. Like that was fear of death for sure,
Yeah. Yeah.
for sure.
Exactly.
And then it's replaced with an ecstasy and joy. Wow, don't experience that too often.
Well, except that you can
Just keep going skydiving.
just
Yeah.
keep going skydiving or whatever it is that gets you that close to your fear. I
Mm,
mean, that's a pretty extreme example, but a lot of people who've been holding fear back all their lives might experience that on a very small kind of fear trigger, like the tiniest little fear trigger you can imagine.
mhm,
Anybody out there is afraid of spiders?
mm.
There's some of that that's built in, but just nudging your fear enough that you can go through it and find the joy on the other side or the ecstasy on the other side. You don't have to go into public speaking or skydiving to get there unless you're ready for that. I mean,
Mm.
and you're ready,
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
well, you just gotta tap in. That's going back to just knowing who you are and just listening to yourself. Like, what am I actually feeling? Like, do I want to, like, it's like with anything in life, you gotta listen to yourself rather than the external world that's telling you should do this or think that, or, forget
Yep.
all that.
Yep.
What are you feeling? What are you thinking? And
I'm a
that'll do,
big
and
fan of
that'll,
heuristic
yeah.
learning, and there you go.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
jump out of a plane. I,
With a parachute.
with a parachute. Oh yeah, with a parachute. And theoretically, if you're doing it for the first time, in tandem,
Yes.
you know,
Yeah.
because that takes a lot of the technical anxiety out of it.
Oh,
I
I
understand. Haven't
100%
done it.
recommend. Yeah, no, tandem all the way. I think at least in Canada here, it's mandatory. If it was my first time, they wouldn't let me do it anyway. Which, thank God, that's
Yeah.
smart.
Well, you can take classes, weeks of classes and whatever, and work up to it.
You have to do hundreds of jumps before you can do it on your own,
Yeah.
apparently, if not
Yeah.
thousands. So good. I think that's smart.
It's smart. It's smart.
I have a lot of respect for it after doing it. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, that was terrifying.
If only they made like TED speakers do hundreds of speeches before they appeared on TED for the first time,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And this is a lead up. So what I'm thinking is, as you're out there and you're watching movies, listening to music, whatever, seeing people talk on TED, ask yourself how close to their fear you think they are.
Mm,
Because the closer to their fear they are, the more authentic they're going to be in that presence. And you can tell, you can actually see that. If somebody's out there just doing the wind up doll, hitting my 10
yeah,
points, doing my five
yeah.
slides, versus somebody who's really adventuring into the potential for novelty, for excitement, for pushing themselves to the limit where they haven't gone before. And this is very difficult with TED, fair warning, because everybody who's on there is rehearsed.
Yeah.
And what you're looking for is a speaker who can come from like right from the heart the first time. Tony Robbins is a dead giveaway. Well, he's not dead, but he's a giveaway on this because he does that so well, right? And there are others, but see if you can find out there. And in the odd chance that you have a moment to ask them, maybe it's your minister or somebody that they're a teacher, somebody that you know well enough. You have an odd chance to ask them what it's like to be who they are and to stand up and do this thing that they do. That it seems to me like a fascinating conversation. I've had a few of those in my life with people that I respect and got close enough to know, and to really find out, like how much of that is fear, and what is it like to walk into the unknown that way with complete surrender to whatever is going to happen.
Yeah, that's the way I'm trying to live right now.
Right?
It
Yes,
really feels like
exactly, man.
that is the way to live.
That's the point. Because you got to do it all. You can't just do the part that feels good.
No, no, if I'm learning anything this last year, especially, it's a lot of the what we would call bad feelings, the negative
Yeah,
feelings,
the
which
negative emotions.
I just don't call them that anymore. I really I can't categorize emotion this way anymore, where one's a good one and one's a bad one, because of how much you gain from the quote unquote negative ones. The positive ones, that's easy. We understand joy, whatever. Happiness,
Yeah, but
those are easier to
even with
understand.
joy, we can cry. Like
Oh yeah, yeah, you can
right?
feel many, many things from joy.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I think with fear, the last kind of thought I have on this today, I would say is I I think you when you brought up it previously, it reminded me of that there's also the fear of when you feel that element of fear versus when you're just a robot on stage regurgitating a script,
yeah, yeah,
that fear is because you care. And then that's what people also feel when you're vulnerable with that fear, is that you care. And they're like, oh good, they give a crap that that
yeah,
they're here presenting, so I will listen to them. Or whether it's a performance or whatever, any kind of
yeah. It doesn't have to be
interaction.
music. We get that somehow. We can somehow relate
Yeah.
to that moment versus the rest of the time where it seems like the fourth wall is never going to crack.
Yeah, and you're like, okay, cool, you're here and it's well rehearsed, but I'm like, you're not really here with me.
Yeah,
We're not
yeah,
connecting. I don't feel like we're, yeah, versus when people are vulnerable, and then they let that fear just, they master it, but they let it allow them to show that they care. Like, look, I'm a little nervous because I really want this to go well, and I've done so much to bring this knowledge to you today, and whatever the situation is, right?
yeah,
So yeah, I think it's a nice, once again, brings people to community and connection, and that's great. you know.
yeah. And it really does. I mean, you can tell in the room. You can tell around you whether it's working.
hmm
Whether the unspoken, unheard, unseen message has gotten through somehow.
hmm
And I know it's probably something that you see and hear in some other way. We get it, but yeah, that's the juice. That's the juice. Whether it's a scary movie or something you have a chance to sit, in a private audience with the Dalai Lama or something. I don't know. It's a great measuring rod
hmm
for yourself to know if you're in the presence of something that's authentic, or not. It even works on recordings, which is why we feel how we do when we listen
hmm
to music, right?
hmm
Something got through.
Oh yeah, it's great to have that in the recording process as a musician. It's fun to have that fear in the recording, and I do every time, the engineer, or if I'm recording on my own or whatever. It's more, of course, if I'm working with other people, which is sometimes one of the benefits of bringing in other people when you got the budget to have your engineer and all producer, if that and whatnot. Because yeah, again, it goes back to caring. It really brings your A game. It really makes sure that yeah, you're doing the best that you possibly can. And then when the listener's listening to that on the other end, there's that energy. That energy is in there, versus, again, if you're just kind of phoning it in, and
Yeah.
it's very nonchalant, and there's not as much passion, or once again fear in there of wanting to bring your best and caring, then that's felt as well. So it's true. It gets through to the end product.
It has to. Otherwise it's, why bother?
Yeah.
The way I feel,
Also, yeah. Why
right?
bother?
You know, like I got this Okay, studio musicians, we love you. And the reason that you're so good is not that you can just play the notes right without practicing. It's that you can play the notes with all of the emotional content intact
Yes.
without practicing. That's what makes a human so much more important than a computer. And that's a whole different podcast topic. But
Yes.
but that's what we're going for here. We're going for the real thing, and as close to the real thing as we can get, that's fine too. But don't bug me, player piano. As much as I respect the mechanical ability to play for this piano to play ragtime better than I
Yeah.
can, it doesn't work until I can connect it to something human. I can
Yeah.
remember that it was George Gershwin recording both sides of that piano roll. That works for me, right? Wow. Okay. How do we get into artificial intelligence and all of that? What we want to do is wrap this thing up. Do you
Well, that's
want
what
to do
happens on a podcast.
It's what happens on a podcast. Yeah. That's why people listen, because it could go anywhere.
Oh,
Do you want to
exactly.
do like a musical meditation at the end, or
Why not? Okay, so everyone can just close their eyes and start to slowly breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. Again, in through your nose, out through your mouth. Last one, in through your nose and out through your mouth. Or you can just continue to breathe slowly at your own pace, through your nose or through your mouth, whichever you prefer. Just let your breath fall into a relaxing rhythm. And you just focus on the in and the out. The in and the out. With an intention to become friends with your fear. Building a bond, connection, built on love. Breathing in and breathing out. Remember, your fear is your friend and your guide. And you master and become friends with your fear. Have a sense of where you are pushing your boundaries in a healthy way. It helps you grow. It ultimately helps you become more of who you are. Big breath in. Out through the mouth. 2 more. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. Last one. In through the nose. And out through the mouth. And bring yourself back to your body. Feel your hands, your feet, your head, your toes, your whole body. Give yourself some love. Thanks for listening to Discussions of Music, Healing, and Consciousness. Happy October 31st. Happy Halloween. Much love, everyone.
Thank you for listening in on our conversation and for taking time to show your appreciation with a like, share, or subscribe. Discussions of Music, Healing, and Consciousness is a practice of spontaneity, and we welcome your comments, ideas, and questions. There are ways to connect with us in the show notes, so let us hear from you. Until next time, this is Bill Protzman along with Chris Noble wishing you great musical health. Samara Huchaya.